Hi everyone, thanks for coming out today. Martin attended 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗞𝗧𝗧𝗜𝗢𝗡 College High School and Baruch College. He started his Wall Street career at age 17 at the hedge fund 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗡𝗦. He also worked as an analyst at Intrepid Capital before founding MSNB Capital. He also founded Princeton after that. And after that, he worked as a CEO of 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗡𝗦 Pharmaceuticals. And that's when he gained his fame for hiking up the price of Daraprim. And now he's the CEO of Good Systems, which he might tell you a little bit about in his talk. I'd like to welcome Martin Shkreli.
Thanks for having me. So I really appreciate you welcoming me here. So I think a big theme of this presentation is, and theme of my life, and maybe what'll be a theme of a lot of you guys in your lives, is the concept that I often find that intuition is betrayed by logic. And what I mean by that will be somewhat, hopefully, clear. I was reading this book about graph theory the other day, and basically there's two lines here, AB and CD. And some of you may have spent the rest of this week doing this, so I'm sorry. In essence, we define these two lines as finite lines, and XY is a new line, and we'll call it the common measure line. We used it as a ruler almost to measure the other two lines. And so you can derive AB is equal to some value m multiplied by that common value, and the length of AB is, in other words, the product of those two things. And CD is n xy. So obviously m and n have to be whole numbers. So the intuition would tell you that for any pair of lines, or any lines at all, in fact, you can think about the line from here to my house in New York City, and the line from, I don't know, here to the end of the room there. And I think your intuition would tell you natively that there's some value of xy. There must be some value of xy. It may have to be very small. It may have to be the width of an atom, but there's some value of xy. If any of you can prove that it's true or not true, I'll pay your college tuition for the rest of your college career. Undergraduate only. You have to prove it by the end of this presentation on a piece of paper, and good luck. And maybe I'll give you the answer at the end. But intuition and logic are very important concepts in kind of what happened with drug prices and so forth. I see at least one person's going to try. So part of the reason I've done this speech in a few local universities or places that are relatively close to New York City is, I think in some ways I'm trying to dispel some myths about me. And in other ways, it's a great opportunity to see the schools I could never get into. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. This is the apartment building I grew up in. And I went to a high school called Hunter College High School, which I think sends about 5 or 10, maybe 4 or 5 kids to Princeton every year. I wasn't one of them. And this is sort of what my childhood looked like. I love this old computer program called 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗞𝗚, which was one of the first programming languages. It's called BASIC, and I'd hack away at that all day long. And eventually, I liked science and things like that, and I loved the band Weezer. Eventually, I fell into this sort of crazy stock market thing. And I don't know, maybe by show of hands, how many of you are here because you care about investing in finance? Not many. Okay, that's fine. I have lots of interesting things to talk about, but I don't want to belabor it. I gave a talk at the Harvard Investment Club, and all I cared about was stock market. So I talked about that virtually exclusively. But suffice it to say, I kind of started watching stock prices and thought they were really interesting sort of puzzles in their own right. Basically, in the stock market, you have to predict what the future price of a stock will be and use the evidence sort of like a proof or any other thing, where you have to study it and think about it and make a guess. And you might be right, you might be wrong, but how good you are at the game is sort of what counts. And so I started to play that game. I met this guy, Jim Cramer, who's sort of a television personality, but at the time, nobody knew who he was, and I worked for his hedge fund just before my 17th birthday. So NASDAQ was at all-time highs. We were in the throes of the dot-com bubble, and there was it was quite a lot of fun to watch that bubble burst and then get reflated over the last 15 years. After that, during that, between high school and college, I decided that I really wanted to do work in investments. I kind of regret that decision, and maybe if we have time, I'll explain why. But regardless, it's sort of what I did. And Jim focused on technology stocks, and he had nobody looking at biotechnology stocks. And I had this profound interest in all science, and he said, you actually would be a great fit to sort of just take a look at these stocks here and there. So I became a drug stock analyst, if you will, or at least that's what I really wanted to be. For a lot of my time at the firm, I filled the copy machine with paper, and I got Jim a water, and when he wants to throw something at somebody, I'd be the first person to get thrown something at. And if you watch his TV show, it's sort of what he's sort of known for. And then I went to a larger hedge fund that was part of this storied Julian Robertson Tiger Cub complex, and that's when I really started to make my career. So like the math puzzle, I was 19 when I was encountered this puzzle. There's a company in Tarrytown, New York that was developing this drug for obesity. And this is the data I looked at, and it's not unlike a math problem or a physics problem or whatever you guys study here, a problem you look at. And I looked at this and I said, okay, this is a drug that hopefully people who are obese can take and lose weight. And I saw that the placebo group had no change in weight. These are people who baseline weight would be roughly 250, something like that. And the 0.3 mg per kg dose, or microgram per kilogram dose, had a small, very almost intangible weight loss. The 1 mg microgram per kilogram dose had almost 8 pounds, and the high dose of 2 mgs had 6 pounds of weight loss. I looked at this data, and I had to sort of conjure what would happen. This is a small, so-called phase 2 clinical trial. And I had to guess what would happen when they did this study in 2,000 people instead of the 100 or so people that it's done in. And I made a bet. I bet that the company would not the drug would not actually result in meaningful weight loss. I thought that this data was a mirage, that this data was misleading, and that in fact, when put to the real test of a very large, well-done study, the drug would fail. So my theory on this was that the drug was a monoclonal. It was actually not a monoclonal antibody. It was the company's known for making those now. It was a recombinant protein. Recombinant proteins are very large molecules, and the company would tell investors that the drug, the way the drug worked, which is a very important part of explaining why a drug works, it has to be believable. It has to stand to reason. And the company said, well, this drug sort of, upon injecting it, it sort of swims up to your brain and does something funky in your brain. Maybe it binds to a receptor or something, and it elicits some physiological change, and you don't want to eat it anymore. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable. The problem is that big therapeutic proteins can't get into the brain. The brain operates on a size exclusion basis. Large drugs, the pills we take are small molecules. They have a molecular weight of less than 1,000. This drug had a molecular weight of 100,000. It was impossible for this drug to enter the brain, in fact. So if the drug can't enter the brain, well, it can't work the way the company thinks it works, and in fact, it probably doesn't work at all. So the results were these. This was, hard to say it was one of the best days of my life, but it was an interesting day. The stock plummeted 75%, and I'd won my little intellectual challenge. The drug only results in about a couple of pounds of weight loss. And even that I still think to this day was artifactual. But the company that I was working for made a fortune, relatively speaking, on this trade. And I sort of thought about it as just a fun chess match, basically, that resulted in many millions of dollars. Many of you probably play chess. I'm very bad at it, and I still like to play it. And solving the chess problem was really a lot of fun and very profitable. But I sort of cut my teeth on sort of learning stuff like this. So, like I said, the company stock plunged. The company's since done remarkably well. So after that, I started to think about real businesses, not just companies that were hoping and praying that their drug would work and cure some terrible illness, which is still a real business, but businesses that actually have revenue. And I stumbled eventually upon this equation, which is somewhat tautological, but it's also deceptively dense. Price times volume is sales. Revenue is the company's sort of money that comes into a company, otherwise known as sales. And there's really just two levers to push. You can have people demand more of your product, or you can make it cost as much as possible, and you really want both to be a maximum. Obviously, if you raise the price of the Big Mac too high, you might lose your volume, and vice versa. If you lower the price dramatically, you might raise your volume quite a bit. And this is all sort of basic stuff. And a lot of people think that I just woke up one day and decided to be the world's worst person, and that I don't know, it fell on my head as a kid or something, and I or I like strangle kittens in my spare time. But I actually decided that I'd learn from the very best investors who ever lived, and Warren Buffett is probably that. And you know, I think people get taken aback when I say that my hero is Warren Buffett, because this is a quote from Buffett where he says, you know, basically, if you can't raise the price of your product, whatever it is, you don't have a good business. And if you can raise the price of your product, you have a great business. And I remember exactly where it was when Buffett bragged about raising the prices of his candy company. Drugs aren't candy, and I'm not saying that they are. In fact, I'll make a case in a second that they're far more important than candy and probably have to be treated as so in the way that favors my argument. But independent of that, the point is that it's a pretty classic truism that pricing power in business and investing is one of the most important things to look at in the firm. So it wasn't sort of an accident that I learned about pricing power across all kinds of businesses, but certainly to my own business. And what I thought was ironic is that Buffett is one of the most admired people in the world. And if you look at his returns, he's made a lot of money by raising prices. By the way, does anyone want me to go back to the proof slide so you can write down the stuff, or anyone? Okay. Yes? Okay, I can go back real quick. Better copy it down though. So yeah, I forgot you guys have phones. I also idolized Bill Gates as a child, and when I was a child, it was 1994, and Bill Gates was one of the most hated men in America. Today, he's the most admired man in America by a wide margin. And this is a guy that's criticized for gruesomely and cruelly stamping out any competition that stood in his way, illegally, by avoiding the federal trust, the federal trade commission's antitrust provisions. They're actually created by David Rockefeller, who is a similarly gruesome and terrible capitalist who controlled the country's oil supply. They actually had to make the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act because of his crazy monopolism. We all know the board game, but the FTC was created to literally combat Rockefeller and Carnegie and other people who are very good at the game of capitalism. I trust that everyone's okay with the slide. So I went back on Google the other night, and I actually found these quotes about Bill Gates. Now you can see in 2015, he's the most loved man in America, but in 1997, he was described as Satan. He was described as the devil. And he was criticized in front of a Senate committee. I know what that feels like. But you know, this is the same guy 20 years later, and he's the most admired man. You can't like solve the proof like talking to each other. So anyway, this is the photo that got me the moniker PharmaBro. We looked at this stock. This is like a year or two ago, and I was convinced, similarly to the obesity company, that this medical device would not function as intended. It was intended to be a dialysis-like machine, except instead of the kidney, it would apply to your liver, and it would rescue people with liver failure, which is a really important thing. And studying this thing, I actually want to make my own device so it'll hopefully actually work. But this thing certainly did. And I wrote this 44-page paper about why it wouldn't work. And it's called the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗢𝗓 something or other. You know, this company tried over and over again, like Sisyphus, to roll this boulder up the hill and failed. And you can read it and read sort of my thought process. And in any event, the company sort of made all these erroneous logical assumptions. They did something called subgroup analysis. Or an old statistician called Bonferroni suggested that you have to correct the p-value, in other words, the alpha, that you have to make a logical conclusion, based on how many times you try to make a conclusion. And that gets logarithmically and exponentially more difficult to do. It's sort of like when the Knicks lose to the Bulls, and you say, well, they had a really good first half. Well, that's not what matters. If you stop the game at the first half, then it would be what matters. But the primary endpoint in the game is total points. And so people do this in life over and over again. They say, a good example is this joke. You know, they did a clinical trial and they found that, well, most people didn't benefit from the drug. Everyone who took the drug on a Tuesday, who had a blue shirt, who were drinking a soy latte, did really well on the drug. Therefore, we should do the clinical trial with just those people. And obviously, such an example is ridiculous, but you'd be surprised at how many times, including this company, very much did exactly that. And I won't bore you with the exact kind of minutia, but suffice to say, this company disappointed the world with these rough results. And I think that it's a very tough position to bet against a company that's actually trying to do this wonderful thing. A liver dialysis machine would save 1 million people a year, 1 million people's lives a year, I think. But the problem is that this company's device was doomed from the day they designed it. And the stock was going to fall whether I shorted it or not. And the stock fell and we had this nice profit. And it was a really interesting exercise. Again, I got to learn a lot about how to construct such a device and what the pitfalls might be, but I also got this profit alongside of it. Okay, so that's a little bit about my investing background, and I'll start to talk about drug prices a little bit. I noticed there was an article in the Daily Princetonian this morning that was critical. I wrote a response to the Daily Princetonian, and it's pretty petty and a little defensive, but and so I decided not to read it here today, but I hope they publish it. And I'm getting told I'm halfway done here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But how and why we price drugs is something I think nobody understands, especially nobody in this room, no offense. I don't think anybody really out there other than people who are really into the drug industry understand it. And I'm baffled by the number of instant experts on drug pricing that exist when they read about my story. Basically, the drug industry started with these big common diseases like asthma, depression, things like that. And drug companies, in fact, started out of consumer products companies. Companies like Procter & Gamble and 3M, the Scotch tape maker, would have drug divisions. They don't have them anymore. And we really thought of drugs. The first ever big selling drug was Zantac, very commonly known medicine. And it was priced very, very modestly. It was priced like the price of toothpaste. It'd be a few dollars. It wasn't the kind of thing, we didn't think of drugs as these huge tools to fix really grievous illnesses with. And that changed with drugs like Gleevec for chronic myelogenous leukemia for $50,000 a year. So anyway, the drug industry sort of decided that they didn't need to sell millions and millions of pills. They could sell hundreds of thousands of pills, or tens of thousands of pills, or maybe even just thousands of pills for certain diseases that were less common. And in fact, multiple sclerosis is a good example. This was a disease that was forsaken by the drug industry, even though a lot of people have it, because the drug industries made fun of it. They basically said, oh, multiple sclerosis? I'm going to focus on asthma and allergies. I mean, why would I ever want to sell drugs for 500,000 people? Well, if you're a multiple sclerosis patient, that doesn't sound so great. You're dying. You're becoming progressively disabled. You want a drug too. And it was really unfair for a lot of these rare disease patients. And because the diseases are rarer, the actual group insurance concept, of course, would allow for the payment of these medicines. In fact, one of my companies is making a drug for 400 patients. There are 400 people that have the illness. And the only way to really make a break even on that would be to charge an enormous amount per patient. But because there's only 400 patients, it really wouldn't tax the insurance system in any great way. And at least those patients could actually have a chance to live. That disease I'll tell you about in a minute. So how should we price drugs? And again, I have to speed up a bit here, but in essence, I think that value and cost should be at parity. That if something's providing you this enormous value, that it's saving your life or so forth, that it should be expensive. That's the nature of the utility function of cost. That the more utility something provides you, the more expensive it should be. And that's something that's a very natural extension of anyone who studied economics. There's another model about innovation. Well, something shouldn't really reflect its utility. It should reflect how much innovation is in the product. So something that's 50 years old, well, even though it's still very useful, it's not really a new invention, and maybe who cares? And that's a reasonable theory. And there's other theories like, well, some that are more emotionally maybe charged and less sort of rational. But a good example is this California proposition, Yes on 61. Yes on 61 didn't pass. The Californian citizens, who are known to be some of the most left-leaning citizens in the nation, decided that they voted no on 61, in fact. And 61 was a proposition that would require drug companies to explain why they would why any large drug price increase was done. I actually would have voted yes on 61. I think that if you do raise the price of a drug a lot, you should have to explain why you did it. Despite that, it failed. And I don't think it was because of lobbying. In fact, during the World Series, an ad with my face on it displayed that was yes on 61. And it still failed. It's sort of remarkable. So that wasn't the surprise. The surprise was that it's from California. But anyway, But here's another example of intuition and logic sort of conflicting. There's a stunning misunderstanding about this specific drug. I won't get into too much details. This doesn't really matter. But what people sort of fail to understand about the drug one of the drugs that I sell is that you only have to take it once. So look at this column, therapy duration. You take Daraprim for 40 days. So even though Lipitor is $5 a pill, right? It's actually more expensive on a total cost basis. It's twice as expensive. Because, yeah, it's $5 a pill, that's great. You have to take it every day for the rest of your life. And if you add that up, it's twice as expensive as Daraprim, which is not a cholesterol medicine that millions of people take. It's a life-saving drug that only a few thousand people take. So I hear a lot in the Daily Princetonian article, again, had this. It was sort of this really intellectually bankrupt article where I wrote to the Princetonian that it was as intellectually bankrupt as one of Donald Trump's casinos, but I couldn't get the wording exactly right. But the idea is that, people always say, well, oh, $750 per pill. That's a lot. That's got to be hard to get. And the problem with that theory is that if that's the case, and this isn't a slippery slope argument where I'm saying, blame the other guys who are worse at this. But if a drug that's $750 a pill is hard to get, then how is a drug like Soliris, which is $400,000 a year, every year for the rest of your life, how is that not impossible to get? You're going to be paying, if you have this rare disease, it's called paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. I know many doctors that have ever heard of it. The point is that this axis argument is wholly debunked. If you can't get Daraprim for $20,000, how does one person get 𝗟𝗜𝗢𝗢𝗏 or 𝗥𝗘𝗖𝗢𝗠𝗘𝗡𝗏? How does one person get Soliris? It makes zero sense to me. I know those medicines like the back of my hand. In fact, I had a hand in Soliris, as you might imagine. The world's most expensive drug. It saves lives. Every single person that needs it gets it. And the same thing applies to Daraprim. But it's more convenient to rely on your intuition. Oh, that sounds like a lot, $750. Wow, that sounds like the price of an iPhone. Could you imagine having to take 40 of those? Well, actually, yeah, I can. Because like an appendectomy or some other surgery can cost $500,000 or $250,000. There's a surgery called a Fontan procedure, which is a triple surgery for an infant that has a congenital heart defect. That surgery can cost $3 to $5 million. That's one surgery right on the table. Healthcare is weird, and it's really complicated. And my message here isn't to walk through every detailed part of healthcare. It's sort of just to sort of talk about what intellectual honesty is all about, and how sometimes the sort of intuitions that we have and the sort of feelings that we want to sort of believe are facts, or sometimes not. So anyway, I have all these charts and stuff about what really, what costs that exist really in healthcare, but I think that this is one of my favorite slides. And what's really happening in healthcare, I think, is that we are valuing it more. That there's an invisible hand that exists that pushes prices up and down based on demand and supply. And if you look at this chart, this is how people have spent their money over the last 100 years or so. And in essence, what we're valuing less of, or at least there's more supply of things like food. So prices of food are coming down. In fact, the last few years, they've plummeted dramatically. And I think things like Uber and Airbnb maybe and other things like that will lower the cost of transportation and housing. But if you think about what are the things you cherish in your life, my parents always used to say, well, at least you have your health whenever I did something stupid. And I think that, there's lately they've been saying it a lot. But the reality is, it really is true. People want to live long, happy lives. And there's nothing more important than that. To me, to my friends, I'm going to go through some of my own health crises that I've had in my life. And the fact that if you look at healthcare as a percentage of GDP, I didn't do this. This isn't my fault. This isn't anyone's fault. In fact, it's a good thing. That's what I'm here to say, is that it's not a bad thing that instead of spending 5% of our country's wealth and productivity on healthcare, we're spending, 15-ish%. That is a natural extension of psychology. That is us deciding as a group that we want to spend more money. This isn't one evil capitalist or one evil doctor saying, I'm going to charge more. It's a groupthink phenomenon. It's way too powerful of a system for it to be some conspiracy that one person has decided, I'm going to raise prices. It's a 55-year trend that's as smooth as silk, that we just value healthcare more as we become a more advanced civilization. And I think that it has nothing to do with greed or anything like that. And if you want to talk about greed, let's talk about the other parts of the healthcare system. 80% of healthcare costs don't come from drugs.